Welcome back to the Rollup High Roller community. As always, nothing on the Rollup is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup, our lovely friends and community. Here today to talk about rollup interoperability. Very interesting set of primitives that we've seen so far. I'm excited to dive into more and see how we can make this security system better. So we have Austin. I think I met Austin. Austin, we met in Paris, right? We were just outside that one
we did,
bar or a restaurant or something.
We met in the streets. I was trying to get to some event. We weren't even at an event. It was literally just the streets in between events, and somehow we ended up chatting somehow about rollups. But yeah, good to see you here again.
Yeah, I think it was the Gearbox thing. They were like booked up or something. I don't even remember, but
yeah, it was on some boat.
A lot has changed, right? A lot has changed. Now you guys are building the open liquidity network and trying to remove these walled gardens that these roll-up ecosystems are kind of being built as. So it's a little bit scary what's going on, actually.
I mean, honestly, that's not even what it's about from our perspective. I care way more. Like, ultimately, with all these things being deployed, they're going to have to talk to each other somehow. And so what I care about much more is making sure that they talk to each other in a way that doesn't create some like proprietary blanket over all of this like modular ecosystem that's developing. Like, these things need to be open standards. That's the only like scalable way in the long term that they can talk to each other. So that's the main thing that I think about. I think it's, a bit rational for these smart contract platforms to build their own ecosystem, but specifically the Open Liquidity Network is mostly focused on just making sure that as we establish standards for these platforms to talk to each other, that they can do that in a way that doesn't bring in unnecessary risk and gives them sovereignty over really what they're building.
Yeah. So Open Liquidity Network, we have shared sequencing, we have bridges. Where does this like kind of fit in this current puzzle?
Yeah, so it's actually at really like the EIP level. So the Open Liquidity Network at large is a suite of open and neutral standards that different participants in the ecosystem can utilize to collaborate better. And so this really exists at the standards level. This is not, it's not even Omni. This is something that we just really care about promoting in space. I'm happy to talk about what Omni is and how it works. But the Open Liquidity Network really is a suite of open and neutral standards to facilitate communication across the modular landscape.
Yeah. So you guys are
go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, so you guys are bullish on rollups then?
Yeah, 100%.
As for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is a future without rollups. If we look at where we're at today in terms of the scalability of these systems, even with the rollups that are in production today, we're still miles away from where we need to hit in order for these things to actually be like usable by people across the world. And so, I first got involved in crypto in 2017. There's been different attempts at scaling solutions over time. So like my first company actually that I built 2018 to 2020 was, again, an interoperability network that linked together L2s. At the time, though, L2s were things like Lightning Network. They were actually state channel implementations as opposed to rollups. Rollups have the fantastic property where we get the scalability of a layer above these core L1 networks, but we don't compromise on programmability, which state channel implementations like the Lightning Network did. So we could have really performant payments with those. So like my first company, we processed 10 billion payments before I sold it. But it's just payments, right? And so then you can't do really exciting things like DeFi. And so rollups give us the full ability to still implement things like DeFi, but still make them cheaper than the base L1 networks. So I don't really think there is a future of crypto without abstractions that we layer on top of these L1 networks that make it much cheaper, much faster confirmation time for end users. There's a lot of infrastructure level work that needs to be done to make these things actually usable by the masses.
How do some of the standards that you guys are building for rollup interoperability compare or similar or different to like an IBC or some like the canonical bridges? Like, what does that architecture look like? And then why why Omni infrastructure?
Cool. So yeah, these things actually work in parallel, right? So the open liquidity network is not a bridge. In many ways, it kind of like deprecates the idea of a bridge. So bridges historically, we had to deal with things like wrapped tokens, right? It's like, all right, some new ecosystem spins up and they want to get liquidity into their network. So they find some interoperability network or bridge to port assets into there. These tokens then usually have some like prefix on them that like is kind of similar to the name of the like bridge that is bringing them there. We basically think that this is a bad design. And it's not only that we think that, it's been proven, we've lost over $1 billion, a lot of which has just gone to North Korea and brought a ton of like bad attention into the space. So it's really hard, like credit where it's due, like it's really hard to build interoperability networks in a secure way. But fundamentally, what you're building with an interoperability network or a bridge is a distributed system that monitors other distributed systems and comes to consensus around what the like aggregate of those distributed systems look like. So it's like it's 2 layers of having to like discern truth from a network of computers that are just distributed throughout the world. That's inherently really hard to do. It's really hard to do just in one layer, but let alone like an abstracted layer that is monitoring multiple. And so fundamentally, it's just like a riskier part of the stack than a smart contract platform, for example. So what we have done historically is we have allowed the risk that comes from working with an interoperability network to kind of be baked in to different layers of the stack. And this really happens at a few different layers. So there's one, asset issuers. If you have tokens that are downstream of some specific interoperability network, if that network gets compromised, that asset is going to get destroyed because people are going to mint an infinite amount of it and just like dump it on the market there. So that is effectively asset issuers giving up their sovereignty, which is an unnecessary risk. They don't need to do that. So one of the standards that we're promoting in the Open Liquidity Network, it's originally built by the Connects team. It's called XERC20. And what it does is it allows teams to whitelist interoperability networks to move their tokens around. But ultimately, the asset issuers themselves are the ones who remain in control of these different platforms. They don't have some like prefix thing on there. So the asset does not become a derivative asset of the interop network. So that's an example of like, we need to make clean abstractions so that we can scale and like actually engage in the modular ecosystem, but do it in a way that we don't take on unnecessary risks. So that's at the asset issuer level. This also happens, you can do this at this whole like blockchain or like smart contract platform level. We saw this with Moonbeam before. There was a canonical bridge that got compromised and destroyed the entire ecosystem. And so like they inherited that risk of the interoperability network into the entire ecosystem. And this also applies to developers. If you're building on top of a specific interoperability protocol, if something happens with that interoperability protocol, all of your users' funds are at risk as well. So what we really care about is creating clean abstractions that like place sovereignty where they should be in the stack, that minimize risk at large as we like really move into the modular space. Because there's a ton of incentive to move into the modular ecosystem and embrace this, but there's also risks. So we care a lot about minimizing those risks.
Yeah, Harmony is another one that was kind of like it inherited that bridge risk, and then all the stable coins got wiped out from the bridge hack. Like we talk a lot on this channel about like, especially with regards to modularity, about like the unbundling process. Like all of the scalabilities in it is elevated because of like kind of the interchangeable parts and the specialization of modularity. But then we lose like a lot of the seamlessness and the interconnectivity, because now everything is unbundled. It's like it could be fragmented if it's not brought back together. These interoperability protocols kind of bundle everything back together so that it's a cohesive and seamless process again. So
yeah, 100%.
In like the modular interoperability like space, is the goal to like, is it again like a hub and spoke model where it's like now everything is plugged into this one interoperability layer, or are there like specialized connections from rollup to rollup, module to module that are specific to those modules or those rollups? Not all of it connecting back to the same interoperability layer, but like specialized modules to connect between these modules?
Yep. So that's a great question. I think that actually illustrates the whole concept of this open liquidity network very well. So you've probably heard some interoperability networks pitching themselves as the TCP IP of crypto or the HTTP of crypto. Fundamentally, that does not make sense because at the end of the day, every single one of these networks has a business model. It takes money to operate them, so they need to accrue fees somewhere. The reason we got TCP IP and HTTP at the internet level was because they had no bias. They were just open, neutral standards that anybody could use. So to me, it's a little weird that, especially with how many parallels to the evolution of the internet that are made in crypto, that we have seen so many interoperability protocols really try to take this proprietary strategy where they try to be the TCP. You were asking about like hub and spoke, like, okay, does this work if everybody plugs into it? No, like it is just an open, neutral standard. You can work with multiple interoperability networks. You just work with one if you want. You can actually use multiple. Like fundamentally, interoperability networks are more akin to like telecom infrastructure. And so they are not the open neutral standards that will facilitate all this communication. They're the ones that are behind the scenes working with these open standards to pick up a state update from one domain and put it on another. At the end of the day, that is the job of an interoperability network, just like, the like routers that exist throughout the world. And so with Omni, are we trying to create the TCP IP of crypto? No, we're trying to create the Starlink, where like we are just a hyper performant system behind the scenes that gives people extremely high security, extremely fast responsiveness anytime they're making a transaction, and at the lowest cost. That is what we're trying to build. And at the same time, our go-to-market strategy here is something that is just deeply aligned with the Ethereum ecosystem at large. We're just open standards. Like there is no proprietary lock-in if you're using Omni. Like the Open Liquidity Network is use open standards and then look at these different interoperability networks and compare them upon those three properties. Like which is the most secure, which is the fastest and going to give the users of your application the best user experience, and what are the costs there. So that's really like how we look at the space at large.
Yeah, and just to play devil's advocate on your point with regards to your alignment as well as general perspective, how do you see Omni kind of generating revenue and sustainability for the long term? What's kind of your vision for the broader goals there for your company?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty straightforward. It costs money to operate the Omni network, and it'll take fees when it is used as the relayer of state updates across these different domains. So very like straightforward in that sense. And how do we make that the most sustainable in the long term? From my perspective, we create the best product. We make it extremely secure and extremely performant in the time dimension, and in the sense of just relaying these transactions extremely quickly to pull in more activity into the network. That's really the simple answer there.
Yeah, it's always an interesting one, like balancing between building the best products in nature of like a public good almost versus trying to get a competitive edge in the market on the economic side. So it's often it's something that I feel for crypto builders on, because it's like sometimes your quote unquote competitors, which on this channel we almost don't even think about anybody in crypto as competitors, but oftentimes builders do. Sometimes your competitors are taking the shortcuts in terms of decentralization, that they kind of opt out of that, or security, they kind of opt out, and they can be quicker to market and things, but with more risks. And then we kind of see the same iterations that we've seen. So I think taking this balanced, more like neutral, standard, quality tech approach is the way forward.
Yeah, and honestly, we've seen that already. So, it's January 30th right now. We only announced the Open Liquidity Network in the first week of January, and already there are multiple tier 1 projects that are onboarding into this. We have Injective, we have Flow. We're going to announce more later this week, and there's 15 in the backlog. And so when you think about any of these other proprietary token standards that have been launched, none of them have grown that quickly. And fundamentally, I think it comes down to the fact that what we are pitching is a better product experience. It's okay, you maintain sovereignty as you are expanding and embracing the modular ecosystem. This standard is a way that you can do that and not give up control over your asset. And so really just I'm very deeply in the belief that when you ETH alignment is not a go-to-market strategy. It's more of a product design philosophy. And if you design your product in a way that actually resonates with the principles of crypto, that'll hit when you're trying to sell it. And so that's worked really well for us as we've been onboarding different assets into this network.
Yeah.
What are the options now for someone who's looking to like interoperate across applications and rollups? Like, is it a choice between using this and like a bridge aggregator or like one of these existing bridges? Is that kind of like the trade-off that projects are considering?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where we'll get with all this is just a different level of abstraction. It's kind of crazy where we're at right now in the crypto space, where it's almost as if people are trying to use the internet, and when they're on one website, they have to go pick up their packets and then take a 15-minute walk and go put them on another website. That is going to be entirely abstracted away from the end user experience here. It'll probably be the like default user experience by the end of 2024. And so the whole point here is abstract that. No user should think about bridges. Like really, that's like an infrastructure level decision. Do you think about like what VM, the website that you are on is being hosted in the cloud? No, you don't, because like it's abstracted. Like the website just works. It'll get to that point in crypto, but we're in this just kind of like almost like laughably bad state from a UX perspective, where people have to personally pick up the packets from one website and ferry it over to another. We'll get to a point where you'll have rollups and you'll switch from one rollup to another, and the UX will look comparable to just switching from one website to another. Because we are going to get like an infrastructure level there where this will just happen on the order of seconds. So it's all about abstracting past kind of these paradigms where we're at today. It's not about competing with bridges. Like this will deprecate bridges at large. There is no need for bridges when you are using open and neutral standards. What you need behind the scenes is interoperability networks that are picking up these state updates and putting them in other places in a secure and fast way. So that's kind of what the competition will shift to more.
Got it. And I got a question. It's a pretty theoretical question, but it's something I've seen on crypto Twitter as of late. Like these interoperable. All right, and we've got a podcast coming out with Espresso today. So if you're watching this, go check that out. Team. So like when you start talking about interoperability, a lot of it is like, all right, you're going to take like the validator network of this ledger or network, and then you're going to combine it with another one. And now you have basically like this network of networks, right? And you have like this network that's now comprised of two distributed ledgers, essentially, right? Combined into one. Now you can extend this to like N networks, right? So like it's not just interoperability between two networks, it's interoperability, combine all the networks into one global mempool or one global like settlement network, or right? So is that like the ultimate goal with liquidity? Like, are we going to get to this like one universal like mempool of intents, and like all the activity will happen in there? Is that like where we're going? Or is there like, is it going to be more modular? Does that create centralization risk? Like, how do you reconcile like the combination of multiple networks into a single network?
Yeah. So from Omni's perspective, so I'll walk you through how Omni works, and I think that will give my perspective on how I think this will play out. So we started designing Omni about a year and a half ago, 2 years. And really, this actually came from our own experience. So previously, we built a protocol called Rift. Went really well. We onboarded 50 mil in TVL in the first like 2 days that it was live. And so we started to think about how do we scale this across different platforms. And we've been in the ETH ecosystem for a long time. And so we knew that the future of Ethereum largely was going to be built on rollups, even though this wasn't really the case at that time. When we started looking at what the best way to design this was, we knew we needed it to be extremely secure and extremely fast. We looked at a number of different solutions. We looked at ZK for this. Ultimately, what we came down to for this is a network that is effectively a subset of the Ethereum network, which uses Ethereum's crypto economic security budget to secure these state updates across domains in a way specifically that does not require rollups to do something like post the state updates to Omni. So Omni is kind of this network that exists around the existing Ethereum ecosystem, drives its security from Ethereum using restaking, and monitors the state updates from these different rollups. And so my perspective here is that we are likely going to see many different mempools on paper. There are ultimately going to be different distributed systems that accept a block into them, and that's going to be a large, I don't want to say mess, but there are going to be many of them. There's likely going to be centralization at the builder level, though. This is one thing that has me concerned about the Ethereum ecosystem at large. I think the most promising work on this right now is inclusionless. But it's not. This actually doesn't even only apply to the Ethereum ecosystem. There are natural centralization effects to MEV, and what we're seeing today is that like 4 to 5 companies are producing basically all the blocks on Ethereum at large, and so there will be many different blocks that are being updated across all these different independent networks. I do imagine that there will be large centralization, though, that happens at the builder level. This is something that I care like very deeply about, because if we don't do this well, we will lose censorship resistance. And if we do that, we lose one of the fundamental properties of why we've been building everything throughout this time. So at large, kind of like Omni exists. It's not going to, no network will become this global mempool. There's going to be like maybe even literally millions of mempools that are like waiting for blocks. There will likely be some coordination layer, though, that is feeding those blocks to these different networks, though.
Yeah, that's the dream. You open up your computer, jump on with whatever wallet that you have, and you just go on apps, and you don't even think about where your coins are, it's just there. You could be on one of 1,000 networks, and you click the button to deposit on that DApp, and you don't even have to think about the instant bridge to deposit, to stake, to this, to that, to send, to all of it, right? Like it's just there.
I mean,
it's kind of
yeah.
dreamy at this point. It's hard to actually see.
I mean, it's funny to hear you say that, because to me, I see like a very pragmatic path as to how we get here. Like, I'm CEO of this company, but like I'm an engineer. I spend a lot of my time thinking about protocol design. We're going to have systems like this by the end of the year where it will be able to be seamless. Like, you'll hop from a DApp on one rollup, and you'll change websites and go do a DApp on another rollup, and you won't even have to think about like where the state is living, where your assets are and stuff. That will be abstracted away, because it'll be so fast that you won't need to think about it as an end user. So,
like, even if your assets are on one rollup and the DApp's on another, and you want to deposit there, it's just the level of speed in the interop from that rollup to that rollup and then into the deposit is so quick. Basically, like, the DApp can show that you have funds on any chain, basically, because as long as it's a rollup that's compatible with whatever their network is, the level of speed from when you click deposit or whatever, bridge and go, is like so fast that it just feels like it's all in one.
And so the really cool thing here is it's not even about whether the rollup is compatible with the other rollup that wherever your assets are in. It's really as long as they're using open standards. Because then, like, kind of the Web 2 equivalent of what you're saying is like, if everybody is running like Huawei telecom infrastructure, these websites will work. But, the TCP IP level is abstracted out from the actual telecom providers. So it doesn't matter. You can like route across these different networks. So maybe, where your assets are at, hop from one rollup across one interoperability network, and then bounce to the rollup that like this application is on through another interoperability network. And you can do things like that using XERC20. So yeah, super exciting. We'll get there. And we just clearly need to get there to provide user experiences that are not this like crazy bridge, wait half an hour for your like funds, maybe think they got like deleted somehow in the meantime, then they appear, and then you go do whatever you're trying to do. That'll all be abstracted away. And I'm happy to get into conversations around finality and like how we'll actually like get to these like seconds level confirmation on these. But at large, that is what the user experience will be, and that'll happen soon. It'll happen very soon here.
Yeah, it's the thing with ZK, right? Is like the key thing that we're trying to solve with ZK is kind of that time to like proving time, basically. And I think that unlocks a whole nother realm as well. Right. Because then
actually,
yeah.
So our take at Omni effectively is like, you don't need that. What we're seeing, I talk with like a lot of teams that have been working on ZK solutions. Right now, we've made a ton of fantastic progress as an industry on this. But what's holding us back right now is the cost to generate these proofs and the time to generate these proofs. Those are still lagging substantially, like a very far way from being able to provide a user experience on the level that we're talking about. So, we built the Omni Network like fundamentally with this concept of restaking. It's like, hey, if we can get an extremely large crypto economic security budget, that allows us to do things in a very secure way. And the really nice thing about crypto economic solutions is they're fast. You don't have to wait for some supercomputer to generate a proof. You can still have extremely high security guarantees as you're doing it. And so eventually, ZK will improve to a point that these proofs will be generated faster. But when we're talking on the timeline of like this year, providing these user experiences to people, it's my belief that'll happen from crypto economic based solutions.
Yeah, Eigenlayer AVSs are pretty freaking cool. This is a world where new app chains don't even have to launch their own token for security. They could just use AVS. Basically, they could just use ETH economic security instead of having to launch their own coin, which would be really kind of a crazy concept where these apps no longer necessarily need tokens as long as they can use ETH's restaked security.
Yeah,
and so
you can get like extreme scalability with that as well. So that's one reason that we started working with Eigenlayer is that when we're talking about this security budget, there are historical interop networks that have tried to achieve what we're doing just by like launching a token, and necessarily you have a more volatile and a lower security budget at large, just because it's capped based upon the market cap of this token that you created. When you work with Eigenlayer, what you can do is you can tap into Ethereum's existing security budget. And so this gives Omni a scalability literally like 2 orders of magnitude greater than like previous generation networks.
You know what settlement network, the only one that has do you know which one is the only one other than Ethereum that has or the only one that has a higher cost of corruption than Ethereum?
Interesting. I'm curious.
Bitcoin.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like for sure, it's definitely not in all L1 like that. That's definitely not the case. Yeah.
That was a joke, but I botched the delivery a bit.
Yeah, that was awful, but it was funny. It was good. Austin was like stumped.
I mean,
that's great.
It's echoing your point that it is like security is totally dependent on market cap of the token that you use to secure your network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're using a crypto economic solution, 100%. If you're using a ZK solution, that's different. There are just like other serious bottlenecks for solutions like that at this time. The tech will get there, and it will be very interesting when it does. But when we're talking about solving urgent problems, we've stepped into this kind of dystopian realm in Ethereum where, Andy, to kick off this call, you talked about people trying to create like their own little like sub moats within the Ethereum ecosystem. People from the Solana community at this point mock Ethereum, and it's legitimate. Like we have stepped into this weird reality where there's all these little sub networks, many of them which are not decentralized at all and really just run from like one server from the foundation. And they are just degrading the global network effects of Ethereum to a point that this has very much become an existential threat to the Ethereum ecosystem at large. So yeah, like what we really care about is solving that problem in a way that's open and neutral so that there is no existential risk that's laid in on top as you're solving this problem of fragmentation that has come about and really degraded the properties of the network.
Well, sir, we are bullish on Omni. Thank you for your time and for the efforts and just great conversations. Been able to kind of understand a bit more about your vision with regards to rollup interop and kind of the future of abstracting away complexities, as well as some other interesting topics. So thank you for coming on, and it's been a pleasure. And look forward to see the evolution of the open liquidity network and the upcoming partnerships as well.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for hosting me. You guys do a great job educating people on the coolest advancements happening in the space. So keep doing the quality work.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Appreciate it, man.
Rob's got jokes too.
Yeah.